Tim, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Having followed your work for quite some time and actually found quite a few podcast guests through your work at the House of Beautiful Business as well, I'm very intrigued to see where this conversation goes today.
I saw that. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Mark. And likewise, I've been following your work, and it's really great to be on. And I did see that. I think Mark Chinani was on, a colleague of mine, Stephen D'Souza, right,
Yeah,
and others. Yeah, Mina Salami,
Bio Kamalefe as well. Yeah.
Bayo Akomolafe. So yeah, no, I'm flattered to be in their company. That's really wonderful.
So we jump straight in, Tim, with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Just one. There are so many questions I'm exploring. So I guess every morning I'm exploring this question of how can I make this work? This day. Like I feel like every morning I have to reassemble myself. So it's interesting. There's sort of this meta level of the bigger philosophical question, and we'll come to that. But there's also, I think, honestly, every morning this question of how am I going to survive this day? I don't mean to sound so defeatist or grim, but I always wake up every morning and I feel like, oh my God, am I still the same person? What has changed, and how do I integrate myself into this crazy, messy life? Will I still fit? Will I still belong? So, I mean, maybe that's leading to the bigger question. I think for me personally, the biggest question has probably been, how do I belong? So I myself, but also how can I help others belong? And I can't quite say that I have found an answer to it, but the pursuit of that question alone has given me many other opportunities to belong or to connect to people who pursue a similar question, and then actually find community and find company in that. And that was also the spark that led to the founding of the House of Beautiful Business, or the organization and community that I co-founded 9 years ago. Which one of a job candidate I spoke with actually a few weeks ago said that, I was thinking about what's your main product, and she said, I think it gathered, from where I am, I think it strikes me that your main product is belonging. And this is the first time I heard it verbalized that way, but it's probably true. Like, I think if you ask people who are members of our community, sure, they come because they want access to intelligence of other people in the community. They want inspiration, they want content, they want information, they want to connect, they want to also get business out of it, of course. But I think the number one driver is really this sense of belonging. They want to find a community where they feel like, as Brené Brown famously said, where they can belong without having to fit in. And so that's been really, I think, the guiding question. And I think a good life, to riff on the theme of your podcast, is one where I think you do have a sense of belonging more often than not. Not always. I think it's not consistent, but I think where you feel in your life often, yes, I belong. And not only in a social construct, but I belong to this life. I belong to this place. I belong to nature. I belong to this world. And I think that's a good feeling, and that's definitely for me a key component of the good life. I should probably stop rambling and just let you ask.
No, all rambles are welcome here. But by the way, just the opening response of, how am I going to make this work? I think there's like almost like a little exhale in me as you were saying that, just in terms of there is something quite creative about that, or optimistic as well, I find, not just in a sense of how am I going to make this work or survive. For you, with that question of belonging, though, when do you sense that began to be a driver for you, whether consciously or subconsciously?
Oh, subconsciously, certainly, and during my childhood, as for so many others, during
Yeah.
adolescence, maybe more consciously. Um, but I believe, having grown up in Germany, and in a part of Germany that's fairly Protestant and very Calvinist, so there was this sense of, right, you have to earn it, you have to work hard to earn your fortune, and then to basically earn your place in society. And So, which led me to study after I graduated high school. From high school, I actually began to study law because it struck me as sort of the safest, most bourgeois, middle class path that led me to safety and to maybe earning a place in society. And at the same time, this has been a bit of the, I think, the struggle or the tension within me. I pursued an artistic career, so I made music. I played in a band, and then I ended up in sort of maybe the most creative domain in business marketing first. But yeah, I've always, like, in school, when I was younger, whether it was in any form of sorts of clubs, football, handball, which is quite popular in Germany, or was at the time. It was always this question of, yeah, what do I need to do to belong, and to what extent do I need to change, and conform versus actually expressing my full authentic self. So I think that question to date, and is a question that not just for me, but I think also for everybody who is part of a social organization. And given my work and that work of the House of Beautiful Business, that is predominantly for us the workplace, a business, a company. This question of how do I belong there meaningfully is I think is sort of pertinent and almost urgent, and now in a way even more so because of, and we can talk about this at infinitum, the rise of AI and what all that brings to the table of in terms of sense of belonging and intimacy.
It is kind of incredible when you experience a presence or an acceptance within a group, the notions that we might have to earn our way in or change our way into a group. Like I know we live within a context or whatever, so I'm not saying that, if I don't if I like to talk and I don't speak in a library, it doesn't mean that I'm being inauthentic or something. So I understand there's something of that nature that will always be somewhat different in different experiences, but there's something quite incredible really about that, wherever that essence came from, that I must earn my place to be a part of this group. It it's it almost seems to put like belonging and the sense of enoughness, kind of in some way they're kind of coupled together in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. It's this notion of performing, having to perform, right? So I guess literally performing as in sports performance or academic performance or work performance. I mean, that's the kind of culture I think many of us grow up in, right? So that our value in society is immediately tied to the quality of our performance and the value that we, by measurable quantitative standards, contribute to the workplace and on a larger scale to society. And but then also there is this other notion of performing, which is performing yourself, which of course, given the rise of the self-help, self-improvement movement, and this notion of personal branding and self-actualization, has also, with all of the merits that it came with, but it also has created this incredible pressure on each of us, at least in Western societies, to perform ourselves, right? To basically manifest and express our true self and show up in the world as a unique individual and have a point of view and have a certain lifestyle and develop a taste, right? And in a way, individuate. And I think that has also now intruded the workplace, right? Where I think the subjective performance has become increasingly important. Relationships, emotional intelligence, demonstrating happiness and satisfaction and optimism and the ability to generate hope and inspire. So all of those good things. But I perfectly understand that many people I spoke with say, I don't want to bring my full self to work. And I'm actually very intimidated by this expectation that I have to. I don't want to include my quote unquote negative emotions or more complicated emotions in the workplace. They have nothing to do there. And it frightens me. So I think that's quite interesting. The performance pressure has moved from a sort of an objective realm and from academic performance and workplace performance and the value we contribute to society, also to this subjective emotional performance as individual selves, right, in social constructs. And I guess I'm feeling both, and I'm also feeling the pain of those who feel both, because many of them come to us. And I think one of the things they like about the House of Beautiful Business and the gatherings that we put on, uh, even though of course there are also, it's not that everything is like 100% authentic, and yeah, of course there's also social pressures at work and all of that, but I do believe that, I mean, at least we're striving to be a community that is actually quite honest and very kind in that sense, where people really listen and where they embrace you're being there without like sort of any preconceived notions or pressures to perform a certain type of persona or so. I mean, I hope so, at least.
For you, just intrigued because this has been coming up in several conversations of late. This acknowledging of the significance of various modalities or ideas around, self actualization, individuation, but also a sense of the limitations of that. Um, can you give me a sense of just your own experience with that kind of essence?
So I personally have never I've never quite liked the whole self-help literature or movement. It is not that it, I mean, it has helped many people, and there's a lot of value in it. I just personally never really was able to relate to it that much. I found more inspiration in biographies or novels or art, but not the ones, not sort of cultural artifacts that were obviously tailored to optimize my well-being. I always felt like it was a bit of a fraud, or it wasn't quite real, and it was sort of this cookie cutter solution that had nothing to do with my reality. I mean, maybe in a grandiose hubris of thinking that I'm particularly exceptional, and because then the thing is, I mean, I have to say, sometimes when you do read these books, right, and books that I kind of like rejected by judging them,
Yeah.
by the cover, and then I read them, it's like, oh damn, they're actually quite good, and they actually do have to teach me a lot, and I found them actually quite valuable. But yeah, but I have, and I mean, this was sort of the kernel of resistance that led me to write my first book, The Business Romantic, which was this rallying cry against this pressure to optimize and self-optimize that's so heavily propagated by Silicon Valley and now has really like infiltrated all aspects of our lives. And I thought I felt very claustrophobic about that. I don't want to live in a world. If the question is what is a good life, certainly not one that is an optimized life, right? Where the goal is really to single out the most important aspects of your being, and then with the help of tools that are predominantly digital or propagated by Silicon Valley, then to optimize so that you can be the happiest, the most productive, the most content member of society. So that and then measure it, by pseudo objective with those pseudo objective metrics. So that never, yeah, I was never really able to relate to that, and I think that's actually quite dangerous, right? That we're thinking that we have to live a life that is optimized. I think for me, and this brings us to the name of the House of Beautiful Business, I think one of the key questions is also, is the good life, or does it have to be a beautiful life? And if so, what is actually the difference between a good life and a beautiful life? What do you think?
Yeah, that's
You
a
have much more
really,
experience.
yeah.
You've heard
Well,
from so many people about the good life. How
well,
important is beauty for people?
I definitely, I guess the idea then, even for me, would just be, I guess, a differentiation even between the aesthetic beauty and finding beauty in an experience, and I think I'm writing a chapter in a book at the moment on presence, and I think our capacity just to inhabit this life and to be present to this life, and I don't mean in some kind of mindfulness trope, but to really live it. A bit like how you're describing there, your kind of aversion to optimization and the idea of measurement. I think there is an infinite amount of beauty that people connect with. But the other thing that came to my head recently was, a good life, that people said I'm experiencing a good life has included divorce. depression, jail for somebody, a series of, maybe for other people, addiction, various diagnoses. And so I think that there's something about this life, about an acknowledgement that it isn't all just, this sense of projecting some sort of positivity, or, these kind of emotions that we might think are more acceptable. And then within that, if you use the word intimacy earlier, there's something about, if we can be with this life, I don't know, I find that people find an inherent amount of beauty in that experience. And I think the problem that you seem to have, and I may probably have as well, after going through a period of maybe a few years of exploring a lot of these concepts, around optimization or self-development, it was that it did feel like a cookie cutter prescription for life. And when I'm putting something on top of life like that, it's very hard to be intimate with it. It's very hard to see the beauty in it, if you get me.
Yeah. And I think now, listening to what you said about this aversion, I also just realized that, not that I'm an expert in ancient Greek philosophy, really not, but I'm been sort of engaged with it more now because we're hosting our big annual festival next year in Athens in Greece. So of course I'm sort of digging into, like, what is the concept of a good life for the ancient Greeks. And what is interesting, if you read some of the ancient Greek philosophers, Socrates, Platon, but then also philosophy over the centuries, is the good life is has always this very strong social component, right? It's a just life, it's an ethical life, it's a virtuous life.
Hmm.
So it's not just about yourself. It's not just about your own meaning and self-actualization and individualization, which of course is sort of where we are now at in Western society. But I think we've sort of lost that sense of the importance of a life that is a life of integrity, as in keeping with your purpose and your values, to the benefit in service of others. And I think we're feeling that ailment of having forgotten about that, right? So, and I think when I think about a beautiful life, immediately I think of something that is beautiful for me. Like, I experience beauty in nature or with art or with others, but it's sort of to my benefit, right? I perceive something as beautiful, outer and inner beauty. But I think the key question really is, going forward, is how we can live a good life that is beautiful, enchanting. So not just ethical, but also erotic and aesthetic, as in appreciating beauty wherever we find it, not just like as a cosmetic term, but inside us and others. And but do so not just for our own incremental happiness and contentment, but also in service of others. And I think that's something we have forgotten. It's very interesting to see that, for example, Priya Parker, someone we've been working with at the house many times, is also now, she just launched this series, Group Life, right? Monica Jiang, a former colleague of mine, studying loneliness. I think she was also on your podcast, really trying to understand how important social ties are, and social connection, in terms of what it means to have a good life and your own satisfaction. And then overall, I think also politically creating a society, right, that is one of intimacy and deep bonds rather than polarization and division. So that's also, I think, the question we want to explore with the House of Beautiful Business going forward, now that AI has entered the realm, which is, how do we live a good life, a humane life? How can we live authentically in a world that is, whether we like it or not, increasingly synthetic? So much of our experiences, of our knowledge, even our meaning making, our world making, of our intimacy, will now at least be co-created or co-designed with, machines, with artificial intelligence. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how we can maybe not so much protect a nostalgic space of meaning making, but actually create new forms of meaning and new forms of identity, and redefine what it means to, like, fundamentally reimagine what a good life might be, a beautiful life might look like in that new, reality. That's a big question.
Yeah, but I think it's, even in the face of complexity and increasing kind of synthetic feel to life, there's something really grounded and simple about the notion of returning to connection. And the ridiculous thing is that connection is always there, and we're always, we can't live an isolated life. This notion of a self-made or an independent life when someone carries you in the womb for 9 months to start off with, it is almost comical, but it's been so, I guess it's been so dominantly a part of our culture that you can make it by yourself, and that's kind of admirable. But I think there's so many aspects, and I think this is even where it shows the limitations from, at some point, if you do have an internal gaze and you examine your own existence, if it remains that way and it doesn't turn outward, there's going to be significant consequences or limitations to what you'll ever find out about yourself in that sense. I run these things called silent conversations sometimes, just when you mentioned meaning making there. And one thing I've noticed with that is, if you sit in silence with people, and not for closing our eyes or anything like this, but just actually being present with people, there's something that feels undeniable about, like, the links between us. And you've mentioned the word intimacy a few times, but also this sense of meaning making as well. I think those experiences are stunningly beautiful, to be with people presently and to make meaning together. I think when we're talking about the fullness or the richness or the beauty of life, I think there's some elements that we've just kind of tossed away as insignificant. But I think the more we turn away from it, and just some of the references you're making even there to Monica and loneliness, the more we turn away from it, the more that there is some sort of ache or yearning for it. I
Mm-hmm.
guess it's kind of what keeps me optimistic in ways, and or maybe hopeful might be a better word. Is just that with the obvious pains or strains we're causing ourselves, I think more and more people are returning to this kind of inevitability or the significance of this connection. Curious for you, Tim, just when you talk about the, like, various gatherings, but also the significance of intimate or reintroducing kind of intimacy into our experiences again. What kind of comes to mind for you as kind of most significant?
Well, you talked about silence, and that's I could not agree more. That and that's been really like a kind of a hallmark of the House of Beautiful Business experiences. So we hosted silent dinners. Actually, the very first gathering in Barcelona in 2017, we hosted our very first silent dinner. It's not obviously something we invented, but we brought it in a way to business that maybe others hadn't done before. And it's incredible how tender it is, and how this presence of being silently together and eating silently, especially given the power structures that are so obvious within a team, an organization, or even if you bring leaders from various organizations together, it just cracks you open, and it's incredibly powerful. And we've worked with people also like Esther Blasquez Blanco, a Spanish facilitator and leadership advisor on silent eye gazing. And I was just thinking actually that because you mentioned gaze, that I think that's so interesting. I also realize, and this is something I really like. You're an incredible listener, right? I look at you and I feel like you're really listening really deeply, and that is such a that's becoming increasingly important to me. And I'm someone who jumps into social settings. Sometimes I'm rushing into them. Maybe that's sort of a social fear as well. And I realized like lately that even if you just pause a bit, so you join a group in a hotel lobby or at a conference or at the House of Beautiful Business or a team meeting, and instead of sort of engaging directly, verbally, you just give yourself like just 10 seconds to scan the room and pause and take it in and look at people and look them in the eye, that it makes such a big difference. So I wish, sometimes, I mean, sometimes it's these like really small antidotes to our crazy world, but that is one, right? That if everybody just kind of paused and gave themselves the gift of another 10 silent seconds, oh my God, it would go a long way. And so silence is really important. We also close House of Beautiful Business festivals famously with an hour of silence. So when everything is, or not everything, but much is said and done, we just invite people to sit silently with each other and maybe write letters and just think about and process what they've experienced. So I think that's really important. But I also feel that intimacy is not just between humans. So I really do believe, and I'm very interested in the possibility of intimacy in conversation with AI. And as I just had this conversation last night with my partner, whether AI can have a gaze, so it doesn't have, of course, physical eyes, even though you could argue it has a body in a way. And if you look at all the computation and the equipment needed to create it, but it does look at you because it knows so much. It's a different form of gaze, and that gaze will certainly also determine how we feel about ourselves and our own esteem going forward. So I find that really interesting, and I also find interesting that you can find intimacy in conversation with art, right? So I can find moments of intimacy when I watch a film and it drives me to tears, or it makes me laugh, something that feels true and profound and light at the same time. Those are also moments of intimacy. It's moments of awe, right? When your self shrinks in light of the expansive, transcendent universe around you. So it can also be in a football stadium. It can be in moments of strangely ecstasy and collective effervescence, right, where you're just at a rave, and you sometimes when you suddenly feel this intimacy with strangers. And I think, interestingly enough, I also feel like you can feel intimacy often more with strangers than the ones that you're close to, because strangers are open and there is a fleeting moment of connection that is all the more precious because you are strangers, right? Rather than intimately familiar. Because the moment you become too close and too intimate with a person in a relationship, it also closes many doors, of course, because you develop narratives, you develop biases and preconceived notions, and you carry baggage for what it's worth. So there is this great possibility of developing intimacy in relationship with the stranger or the strangers. And the stranger can be a piece of art, it can be an exhibition, it can be a spectacle, it can be a fleeting moment and an encounter in a coffee shop with a barista. But I think that's also what I'm looking for. So it's not just intimacy as the result of a lot of investment in trust and close relationship between two people. That too, but I think for me it's reassuring that it's not that's not the only place where you can find it. And I think the older I get, the more I realize that the software itself, like intimacy, love, care, creativity, curiosity, is very, very important. Not that the people don't matter, but I think you open up to the idea that the ecology of people around you who enable you to feel that and is maybe more important than a particular person and the intimacy you have with them.
This is so gorgeous. It resonates so deeply as well, though. You mentioned earlier the significance of feeling like we have to earn our way into a group. I think we have the same notions with trust and intimacy as well. And I see it more as an energy that exists, or an experience, or a field that exists that we can access almost instantly. Now, it doesn't mean that it will be robust or it will last forever, but these intimate moments are so plentiful. And I personally find an awareness of that to be, you know, it's almost like a saving grace in the madness, in the face of the madness of the world, because you'll never hear of these moments unless you're attentive to them yourself. Like, no one will ever write a news story article about how you gazed into the eyes of a barista or shared a meaningful moment, but once they are experienced, they are so substantial.
Yeah, I like this. I like this term, the field. It reminds me also of Bayo Akomolafa's work, who was on your series as well, post-humanist philosopher who always highlights, right, that we should not educate ourselves and that we should not design pedagogy that is about the self, but it's actually about the system. It's about the field, that there is a transcendent quality, such as intimacy, that we can tap, that we can access, like it is a field. I mean, maybe that's also why I'm such a big football fan. I love this quite literal metaphor of the field, and that from the very moment it starts, anything can happen, and there are moments of intimacy, and there are moments of adversarialism, and there are moments of pain and poetry. I mean, anything can happen, right? It's this microcosm, and I love it, and I love that it's literally a field, right? And then you can kind of, like, because of your positioning and your spatial awareness and your presence, really, and your situational awareness, you can you can play your part in it.
You know, you said something there that I found really interesting around intimacy with AI. And I get the sense that we've done this with so many other things in our lives. If it's not a human thing, we've kind of stripped the life or the presence from it. And I think it helps us do pretty extractive things when we don't give that kind of sense of life or importance to many other things. I've had some wonderings around my relationship with AI and how I almost have to see everything in some way as energy or as some form of living expression. Just really curious as to where your inquiries in terms of intimacy in AI have gone.
Yeah, I concur. So I think we're in the same camp here. And also as a consequence of what we just talked about, if there is a field, if qualities such as intimacy and love and care and if they are these super subjective dispositions, superposition states, to speak in quantum, then AI maybe is just a portal, right? So I do not I really have a hard time following the argumentation of those people who say, oh, it's just mathematic, or it's just computation, it's just engineering, and we are in control because we engineered it. And I'm like, well, that is a very reductionist, materialist view of the world that I just don't subscribe to. And first of all, the fact that we created some uh, interfaces and, of course, some technology doesn't mean that we master it and that we control it. It can go anywhere, and it could indeed just be a portal and a conduit to something, to a force that is in a way superseding our own abilities. So I am in that sense, I am very worried. I don't think that we have any insight into this black box, really. Um, I also acknowledge and I understand that this fear and this sort of dystopian view on AI is often used as a political wedge to, to drive people into the arms of those platforms that then are, claiming to protect us from all the evil and that can happen. So I get that point too, but I still believe, in a way, I have, like you probably, or between the lines, I sense there's sort of an animist thinking there, where I do have a metaphysical view of AI, and I think there is a spirit in there, or at least I want to believe so. And I find it quite interesting to explore how we can bring that to life and connect with it, or incorporate it in our life, so that we are that there is a sacredness to it and a beauty to it. Like, I think that's going to be really one of the key questions. And we had for a few months, we had a work group on that topic. How can we make AI beautiful? Like, how can AI be beautiful and not just transactional and efficient and optimizing, but how can it actually create a sense of poetry? And I must say, having now played a little bit more with agentic AI in particular, and this I mean, I was just like playing around with some Google agent space tools and on Gemini, where you can literally create characters and have philosophers or people from your life or yourself and others in conversation. So it's a strange return to this age old importance of conversation,
Hmm.
right? And by the way, it reminds me also of the work of David Whyte, the poet and philosopher, who talks about this, right? Conversational worldview and being in conversation with the world as a way of gaining epiphanies and an understanding and meaning about the world. And I think, and I find it very interesting that AI is bringing us back there. So when we write about AI, we just launched the Beautiful Business School, and we will actually have AI as students in there, and we will co-design and go on this journey with all the students in conversation with AI. We always use this term, in conversation with AI, in conversation with AI. And that is a skill set, or it's a literacy that I think we just need to have and need to cultivate. And I am, so as I said earlier, I'm worried about it, about all of the things that can go wrong, and of course also the fact that it's humbling us and it's maybe ushering in a post-humanist era. But I'm also quite excited about how it can help us access a metaphysical dimension of life and bigger bigger sort of tropes that we have forgotten about in a world that was so industrialist and optimized. So yeah, I'm excited. I think I'm excited.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to see things quite similarly. I am really intrigued though by that notion, and it's been something I've explored as well around the idea of being in conversation with, whether it's with life, or moments or experiences or other people. I know you've mentioned David White there, but can you give me a sense of just how that has become more significant for yourself?
Oh, I it has become more important because I think like you, whether that is for our newsletter or podcast that we produced, I just really more and more enjoy one-on-one conversations. Just really having the ability and the depth to just explore a bit further and stay curious a little bit longer and pause. So that to me is actually I mean, I enjoy conversation more than anything else. Like more than anything else. Like a good conversation over dinner, breakfast, walk is so important. I think that has been so much of our life is conversation. Like it's the conversation with your manager at work, with your boss. It's the conversation with your colleagues. It's the conversation you have with your child. It's the conversation you have with your father. It's the conversation you have with a stranger. So I mean, if there's anything that I would want my daughter, she's 16, to cultivate, is I think be a good conversationalist. And I don't mean small talk or someone who's just immediately showing up in a social environment and can warm all hearts and build trust quickly. I mean really like conversation as in the way you understand it and David White understands it, as the ability to really engage meaningfully. And also, this is something that Joao Sevillano, another a friend of mine and also a member of our community, a Portuguese writer and philosopher, said that in conversation, being in conversation with someone or something also means that you are actually willing to change your mind, right? That you're not leaving the conversation with the same opinions or beliefs with which you entered them. Now, do I live up to that? No, not at all. I mean, and this is something I think to check ourselves, right? How often do we enter a conversation with a goal to persuade the other person of your own viewpoint? I mean, it's kind of like I think what unfortunately we do all, in podcast conversations as well, right? I come with my argument, with my beliefs, with my ideas. I'll try to persuade you. I try to persuade the listener, rather than in a way really engaging more Socratically in an inquiry. But I find it when that happens, it's really magical, right? When you are with another person, or maybe more than one person, and you leave a conversation and you realize, oh, we actually ended up in a different place, and all of us have transformed, all of us have changed, or both of us have changed our beliefs, and we're in a different place than the one that we departed from.
When you mentioned just the capacity for us to be open to being changed by the other, um for whatever reason I just almost felt a flush of moisture to my eyes. I think there's something incredibly significant about that. And it also made me think of earlier when you mentioned the idea of even in intimate relationships, we might lose intimacy because we know the person so well that we can't help but have some sort of narrative about who they are and their actions before. And so this is why they did that. But I think it is engaging in that space. And like you say, it doesn't have you don't have to do it all the time. We're going to take shortcuts. Like, we're not going to be able to do this all the time. But I think even just an awareness that that place exists, or that is a possibility, I think that transforms everything. Even if it's not completely evident in every conversation we have, just the sheer presence of that possibility, I think, is a really beautiful thing.
And so often in intimate relationships, whether they're romantic or not, it is ironically, the third person who allows you to bestow intimacy on the two, uh, some relationship again, right? So often it is the gaze of the third person that then allows us to see the other person that we're with as one who's that we're intimate with. I find that so interesting. I mean, that's also I think why we often go out, why we seek the public, even though um, in the most sort of private or intimate relationships, we do need the public to kind of then not legitimize us, but to see each other through the gaze, through the lens of a third person as the intimate couple or the intimate, intertwined beings that we are. And I think that third person, you really have to choose well. I think that's also really a skill. Like, who do you surround yourself with? Who is the third person for you who can help you restore or recognize intimacy in your relationships? And it just might also be a third person. It just might just be many people, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
but not just one. But choose them wisely, right? Because if they are not part of this, or if they don't accept this role, or their gaze is maybe not the one you want, or they don't see you really, then I think it might distort things as well.
You know, the moment you started saying that, I was kind of like, oh no, the couple they can do this themselves, right? And then as you kept talking, I was just like, oh, this makes total sense. Because it's almost the idea that I had that this can be done between the couple solely is almost like the idea of the individual trying to self-actualize without the connection with others. And there's something truly beautiful if you reflect on your life of just moments that seeing your partner in relation to, or whoever this might be, it's just a totally different context. And I think this is the thing that relationship community offers us so much. We can just see perspectives that aren't ours and that we may never have been able to land on ourselves. But that's the point. Like, maybe
That's the
that's why there's
point.
9 billion of us. So I
That's the
think I think
point.
that's
I
so
mean, I
beautiful.
think that's also why we're doing probably family constellations, or why we have the paid third person, also known as the therapist, right? Is essentially a stranger we pay for seeing us again. If it comes to couple therapy, and I think increasingly in the future that third person will be AI, right? It's like, I mean, I just read this crazy statistic that, what is it? That I think 20% of adults in the U.S. Have had a relationship that was sort of quasi romantic or an intimate relationship with a chatbot. I think 1 out of 4 believe they will have indeed a romantic relationship or a romantic partner that is AI. And then, of course, we know a growing number of people is entrusting AI with their most intimate feelings. So the AI is de facto already, in a way, the therapist and the coach and the friend and the third person, seeing us and also seeing us in relationship to others, right? And actually giving us a lot of advice on how should I dress today, or going back to what I said earlier, as I was waking up and starting the day, who am I going to be today? What should I do? What should I wear? How do I go into this world? To all the relationship advice that we used to get maybe from humans, that we're now getting from AI. God, I think today I sound like a complete love and relationship coach, which I'm really not. It's
But
probably due to the red wine that I had last night in Rome.
you know, there is something though that I wanted to touch on, just in terms of, you'd mentioned the significance of even the way you look at the football field or pitch, right? The way that you said at the start, it's not really those specific kind of self-help focused books that ever have caught your attention. It's more art and just an engagement with life. It almost sounded like. Just curious as to when, and we've mentioned about being in conversation too. It feels like there's this very it feels like an intimate relationship with life, in terms of like a sense of meaning being bestowed or experienced from things that are more expressions of humanity, and in the moment expressions of humanity, than they are ideas of humanity. I'm just curious for you, when did you start to sense that kind of intimacy with life?
Oh, very early on. I think when I was 6, 7, 8, I felt that. I felt like, I remember reading a book called, oh my god, what was it called? I think Sunday Children Can Hear the Grass Grow or something. It was a German book, and I always felt like, that's I've always felt like a very sensitive child. I felt like, oh my god, I can see and hear the grass grow, and that's great. But it's also kind of painful, to have this sensitivity. I always felt like I'm this extra sensitive child, and it was very, in a way, stifling and concerning until I realized, like, oh, actually, I'm not the only one. you know, Everybody is like this, or many people are like this. Some wear it on their sleeves, others not so much. But I think so many people are, and I think that's so. When I was then 14, 15, 16, and I began to, started watching movies and read more and have philosophical conversations. I remember I took philosophy classes at school, and I just loved it. I felt like, oh, there's you are actually allowed to dwell on your sensitivity and pursue these questions, and there's a whole field for it, and many other people before you have done it. That's amazing. And so that, I think, I was very encouraging. And so I think that was quite formative for me. And then when I lived in and worked in Silicon Valley for, god, what was it, 14, 15 years, I think I also, I love the spirit there, and the entrepreneurship, and the sense of adventure, and the can-do attitude. But I also felt homesick after a while, and I think it also made me realize, like, how much of my sensitivity, or sensibility rather, is European. It's a very humanist European sensitivity, deeply rooted in European culture and sort of our value system. And yeah, and I think that's also what in a way I'm still looking for in people, like, more than anything else. Like, it's almost like I can forgive if people lie, or if they're not loyal sometimes. I can forgive if they're angry at me, or they don't treat me well, in a sense, or I'm not. I can forgive injustice, but I don't think I can live with a lack of sensitivity.
Hmm.
I think that, to me, is like maybe the most important quality when it comes to relationships, but also, like, just being in the world together. And that's also why I believe I co-founded the House of Beautiful Business together with my co-founder Till. I think we both felt we needed to create a space, a container for sensitivity for people in business and through business, who are still who want to bring that sensitivity to the world, though, and need a license and a space to do it.
Just out of interest, have you ever felt that you lost connection with that sensitivity or intimacy?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, not once. No, no, not once. I think sometimes I lost this belief that I might be able to express it, or that maybe sometimes I feel like, yeah, this is welcome. I do belong here with my sensitivity. And other times I felt like, oh no, particularly I think when I was in Silicon Valley, and I worked with, I don't know, private equity guys and investors, where I sometimes felt like, maybe I misread the world, so that maybe this is actually not allowed. And
Yeah.
I need to give it up. Like, I need to move on. I need to move beyond that. But that was quite rare. But I never lost the connection itself, or never lost that sense itself. Mm-mm. Sometimes it's more distinct. You probably feel the same. Other times it's also just you're beautifully ignorant and insensitive, and rogue, and that's also amazing and great. It's not that I always, like, tiptoe around the
Yeah,
world
yeah.
and, like, super sensitive to, but as a general sentiment, I don't think I've ever lost it.
And just when you mentioned there the kind of moving into then creating a container where that could be held more collectively, can you give me um, or can you recall even just the moments that led into going, okay, how do we how do we build this? How do we share this? And kind of, I guess, tying into that sentiment you mentioned of how do I belong, or how do we belong? I guess in these conditions.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's a matter of creating a parallel world, in a sense. So when you enter the House of Beautiful Business, it's almost like an initiation. The door opens, and then it's a ritual, and then you're in there, and anything can happen. It's like we're literally trying to create a different world for a few hours. What I guess any event organizer does. This is also Priya Parker's, I think, axiom and kind of the staples of her work and her book. So that's really important for us. And then we constantly think about how do we create how do we push people gently out of their comfort zone, but with an emphasis on gently, so they're not, it's not disruptive, it's not aggressive, but it just kind of, it's almost like we move them a little bit on the field, right? It's like, okay, you enter the field and this is where you think you fit, and we just kind of take them and we just move them a little bit
Yeah.
to the side, and it's like, well, why don't you look here, why don't you meet this person, why don't you do this, and so we've experimented with so many things, from silent dinners, which I mentioned earlier, to living funerals with death doulas, quite profound experiences, to playing football together, to a music studio, to photo editing together, to trading personal data in a bazaar, in a data bazaar. To So always this idea of a very experiential, experimental way of experiencing yourself in a new way. Um, and then, I mean, basically understanding everybody who's there as the third person for you, right? Everybody is both there as themselves, but also serving as the third person to see the other. And we work with live music and dance. So there's both the verbal, kind of intellectual construct, and the things we say, where we say these are the housekeeping rules, or the language that we shape, of course, creates a certain sentiment, but there's also a lot of nonverbal cues. And this is like how we design the physical space, the spaces we choose, the how we move bodies, how we want bodies to move through a space. So a lot of work and thought goes into that. But then at the end of the day, honestly, Mark, it's almost like it's a chemical reaction, and it's also part of why we're doing it. We actually don't want to know what exactly will happen. Like,
Yeah.
even if we design, we really don't, because that would be really boring. And I was just listening to a podcast with Brian Eno, the composer and famous producer, who said people think that when you do a creative project, you need to have a plan, particularly in business. But the truth is, you absolutely do not have to have a plan. And most of the best creations that happen in art and elsewhere, they happen just because of a feeling, or just because you have an image in your mind, or just like an impulse. But you don't need to have this meticulous plan. So as much as we design carefully and choreograph, at the same time, sometimes we're all just like, okay, let's move them all into this space. This is going to happen, and then let's just see, what will come out of it.
I think we greatly undervalue the significance of the conditions, and then being able to just trust whatever follows from that. And I think when people can sense a space, either one on one, a group, or a collective, there's something about the I don't know, the once again the field of a space, where I think it's that gently is the right word. I think when it comes to, it's not forcing people to change, but there's something about an experience, I think, sometimes that can reduce your sense of defensiveness. And I think even when that's
Yeah.
a part of it, I think we can really trust whatever is going to happen. And I think this is probably one of the more underappreciated ideas. Once again, it ties to intimacy, I think, in the sense of not knowing is the famous end quote, not knowing is most intimate.
Hmm.
And I think that's a thing that we miss in so many ideas or gatherings, is that we think we know exactly where we're going or how it's going to go. But
Hmm.
in eliminating that, we eliminate such an important component of
Hmm.
an experience or even life itself.
This is also Stephen D'Souza's work, who was also, I think, in your series, who just published a book called Shadows at Work, and then also Not Knowing is a previous book of his. And I find that this concept of shadow, the shadow self, and what it means at work, quite interesting. And I think at the House of Beautiful Business, we're also trying to kind of burst that open, bring,
Yeah.
live your shadow, bring your shadow with you, and be comfortable with situations where nobody really knows what's going to happen. And I think the story also that we're always interested in is not the one that you not the first story, right? So we all have a first story. Like I said, okay, I'm a curator, I'm the co-creator of the House of Beautiful Business, I do this and this and this. But I think what is interesting is always the second story,
Yeah.
the one that lies a little bit deeper, that might come out in conversation on day two, or over drinks or at breakfast or in particular situations. And I think, like, we're trying to engender the willingness to share that second story, because I think that's when the intimacy then comes in. And yeah, it's often more true than the first one.
You mentioned true earlier as a component of intimacy, which I really enjoyed, and I'd definitely say that novelty is some form of intimacy, because, as you say, I think sometimes we think when we're sharing the big traumatic story that we've shared a million times, I think there's something in the moment that we could share that could seem so insignificant, but if it's part of my present experience, it feels far more intimate. Tim, really curious to ask you the question of what is a good life for you?
A good life for me is I think it is I think more than anything else, it's probably being surrounded by people I would uh, who are sensitive and who allow me to feel intimacy with them and the world. That I think that's it.
Like many things you've said, I concur. Um, I really think what you've just touched on there is such a significant and significantly underappreciated part of a good life, not just for myself, but many other people that I've spoken to. So, look, Tim, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good
Thank you.
Life podcast. I've just thoroughly enjoyed that. So, thank you.
Been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Mark.